Right.
We have the ability to say, I love Christ. I'm going to run to him, even though I'm sorely tempted by this pleasurable temptation that I like to toy with and coddle with.
This is Ask Dr. E, where Dr. Michael Easley answers your biblical or theological questions in 10 minutes or less. Today's question comes from Janet. She writes, Hi, Dr. Easley. My question is, if a man or woman is not married and looks at another person lustfully, did he or she commit adultery?
You didn't read the rest part.
Okay, the rest says, thank you so much for all that you and your daughter do. God bless.
Yeah, what your
sweet.
Daughter does. That's what I wanted you to read. In Matthew chapter 5, we have 6 contrasts, sometimes called antithesis. Yeah. And it's this formula Jesus said, you've heard it said, but I say to you.
Uh-huh.
And interestingly, they parallel with a lot of the 10 Commandments. So literally, we might read them, you know these. You literally understand what these mean. That's be the paraphrase of it. Jesus is not negating the law. He's saying, I agree with it. That sums it up, but let me tell you more. And this, of course, is directed at the scribes and Pharisees who are, circling around him.
Yeah.
Specific to Janet's question is Matthew 5. Let me read verses 27 and 28. You have heard it said, there's the formula, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So the pious Jews would understand the connection to the 7th commandment, that adultery is a sin. There's no debate about that. Jesus is not just saying, I'm making it worse. Jesus is saying it's always been this way. You've heard it said, but let me tell you the intent
What it
and
really
the
meant.
Now, what's interesting about this phrase, because I've talked about this passage many, many times with other applications, and I needed to do some homework on this, and I went back, and what's interesting, I would say in the last 2 decades, there's been a big surge in scholarship that says, not just looks upon her with lust in his heart, but looks upon her so that she will lust.
Oh, interesting.
And this was kind of an epiphany. I have a dear friend, and we've been close brothers and shared our sins and struggles and temptations. And he said when he was a young Christian, he was always trying to get eye contact with beautiful women. Then he thought, oh, I made eye contact. And she looked at me. And that's where it starts. And I think it was so interesting that that's what a lot of recent scholarship has done with this Greek phrase. Be that as it may, the point Jesus is saying, the look, the lust, the intent is as if you committed adultery. So simply, it's sin.
Yeah.
Now, she does say a man or woman not married. It's not exclusionary to only single
I think we just
people.
think adultery is, you're married. You can only, you
Right.
have to be married to commit adultery.
Then
but
we call it fornication. It's a
Right.
broad term for immorality in general.
Yeah.
So if I'm lusting after a person, that's immorality. Now, here's the real question for me, is differentiating between my thought life and my practical outworking of sin.
Yeah.
If I have an affair with a person, that's obviously adultery, that's
Sure.
sin, that's immorality. If I think about it, that's precisely what Christ is saying.
Yeah.
Temptation is an interesting thing because when we're tempted, we have the ability to run the other way.
Right.
We have the ability to say, I love Christ. I'm going to run to him, even though I'm sorely tempted by this pleasurable temptation that I like to toy with and coddle with. And passages really help me in hopefully growing in sanctification is Romans 12, 1-3. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. For through the grace given to me, Paul says, I say to everyone not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. It's a wonderful passage about sanctification, that I'm a living sacrifice, and as Swindoll aptly observed, the problem is we keep crawling off the altar because we're a living sacrifice. But that's our spiritual service of worship.
Yeah.
And so it begins, don't be conformed, change your mindset. be transformed. So if this is an illustration of sanctification, what I think about, what I daydream over, what I secretly coddle in my mind tells about my heart. And the goal of sanctification is to be more like Christ, less like my sinful self. Ephesians 4:22, in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted accordance with the lusts of deceit, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Interesting phrase. The spirit of your mind. Put on a new self, which is the likeness of God, and it has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. So, and there's other ones. We're taking every thought captive. I would submit, you can push back on me on this, as we become more mature in our Christian life, we're more sophisticated about our sin. We know 1 John 1:9, we know these things. We probably don't act on them as much as we did when we were non-Christians, hopefully, or young Christians. But we do coddle.
Totally.
We do daydream. We do go to sleep with certain things on our mind. And I think that's where we renew our mind, being transformed. We talk about being prude, watching movies and films. That information, we'll think about it.
Right.
It's really hard to get that out of. I have a weird brain. If I see something, I can remember the line. I can remember the scene. And so you have to be careful with these things. But the short answer is, yes, it's sin. Is it as same as the act of adultery from a theological standpoint? Yes. From a damage in relationships and mind, no. It's different in life because we didn't act on it. We didn't destroy our family. But that thought life, and this is why pornography is so damaging, that thought life is harmful. It weighs you down. It affects other areas of your life. So what's interesting, though, is, I was talking to a psychologist not long ago, the increase of women in these issues is really high compared to what it once was. And a lot of factors for that, but bottom line, he's concerned about our thought life. And he cares and he loves, and you and I need to take those thoughts captive. We need to renew our mind. We need to pray for transformation. And he's a loving and kind God. He understands our struggle.
All right. If you've got a question for Dr. E, call us, text us, or email us. Ask Dr. E is produced by me, Hannah Seymour, mixed and mastered by Sonomorphic, and music composed by Jason Germain.